Bizarre Brain Comics. Hello, my comic book friends, and welcome to Bizarre Brain Comics. I'm Gary, your host. This is where I like to take a look at some older comics, talk a little bit about the characters and creators, and examine the stories and the art. And this time I want to take a step back to the 1960s with Strange Adventures. Number 150 from 1963. This is one that I picked up not too long ago, just a few months ago. And it was real cheap, and now I see why. It's a nice book, good reading copy, except I discovered while reading it there were four pages missing. Like this, the center spread pages must have worn out and were lost somewhere along the way, which is unfortunate. But this is, of course, Strange Adventures was a long-running title from DC Comics. Doing mostly science fiction stories, but other just unusual and weird things. Hence the title, Strange Adventures. And this issue, as you can see here, When Earth Turned into a Comet. And I would guess that the story was based around, created around that title, because it's basically practically an insignificant part of the story. And of course, at this point in time, they had no credits. I just presume that the whole thing was written by John Broome, because he did probably most of the science fiction stories from about this time period. And the first story in here, which is the cover feature. The interior this is a real nice cover though. And Richard Lepard, if you're out there, I've got your comic book. This first story was drawn by Carmine Infantino, who was a very prodigious artist, especially during this period in the 50s and 60s at DC. He was almost like DC's version of Jack Kirby, because he's everywhere. And the second story is a story of The Atomic Knights, which is what I want to talk about. And that is drawn by great Murphy Anderson, who was also like virtually everywhere DC Comics at this time, often teamed up with Carmine Infantino. Like, of course, Carmine Infantino was co-creator of the Barry Allen version of The Flash, and his entry into DC Comics at that time was the beginning of what is recognized as the Silver Age of comics. And of course, he did a lot of the science fiction stuff. I don't know if Infantino did much in the way of horror other than the science fiction-y stuff. And of course, superheroes did The Flash, and he did Batman for quite a while in the mid 60s, often with Murphy Anderson doing the inks, and various other things. His Infantino's art style changed, evolved somewhat through the 70s, and when he did stuff like Spider-Woman and the Star Wars stuff in the late 70s at Marvel. I didn't care for his work nearly as well, and of course he did that on into the 80s. And it was mostly just the stylization of his figures at that time. Murphy Anderson stuff was always great, and Murphy Anderson, he did mostly associated with science fiction and superheroes. He had worked on the Buck Rogers comic strip in it was either the late 40s or early 50s. I can't remember. Did a lot of the science fiction-y things. Worked on Hawkman and the Spectre at DC, and also the DC version of John Carter of Mars for a time in the early 70s, while he was also doing inking jobs over Carmine Infantino and other artists, and then most significantly teamed with Kurt Swan for many years in the 70s, inking Kurt Swan's pencils on Superman stories. And to my eye, they are the best art team for Superman. And I want to talk about the Strange Adventures 150, 1963, the Atomic Knights, and of course the art was by Murphy Anderson with John Broome doing the writing. And the Atomic Knights started in Strange Adventures number 117 in 1960 and were featured in every third issue of Strange Adventures through number 160 in 64, for a total of 15 Atomic Knights stories in the early 60s. They were created by John Broome and Murphy Anderson, and they were survivors of a nuclear war which took place in 1986, and they struggled for survival of the human race in 1992. And because of the radiation present around the world, they wore old suits of plate armor to protect them from the radiation. And they rode steeds which were overly large mutated Dalmatian dogs. And the Atomic Knights went unused, except in reprints, until they showed up later in the post-apocalyptic title of Hercules Unbound. And I remember some of those. I always wondered why they had a Hercules title and placed him in a post-apocalyptic world, which apparently didn't catch on that much because that title only ran just like 6 or 7 issues, I think it was, something like that, along those lines. But I still enjoyed them because I was a big Hercules fan, regardless of the publisher. So we're going to take a little look inside these pages. But before we do that, I want to show you some of these. These are some of my character cards. It's based on comic book characters, science fiction shows and movies, and myth and legends, etc. And if you like any of these that you see here, these here, or in any of my videos, if you would like one and would like to help support my channel, you can contact me here at my email address. And you can have one of these that I've already done for $15 plus $3 for shipping. Or I can do a personal commission, one that you might like, myth, legend, comics, sci-fi, for $18 plus $3 shipping. And there you see this cover. Nice, dramatic, and circular composition on that drawing. It has some gray tones in it. It looks nice. Of course, set on the moon. Looks like the background was referenced from Destination Moon. And this book starts off with a little PSA safety notice. And splash page, when Earth turned into a comet, being confronted by these spacemen. Astronauts on the moon made a discovery of something, some unusual metal on the moon, and then suddenly, earthquake, cracks, and menaced. The commander menaced by quicksand. Oh my gosh, what's going on? Then they're heading back to the spaceship. And then they see the Earth transformed into a comet and flying away. But they notice that the tail of the comet is heading towards the sun rather than away from the sun. Then they discover, it was all some kind of illusion, but it was a shared illusion. The deduce had something to do with the metallic thing that they found. And when they touched it, because the astronaut who was touching it at the time had been thinking about what they called the quicksand pit and moonquakes, and then that's what happened. And one was concerned about not seeing his family again, and then there happened with the Earth. Then they discover, this isn't an illusion. This is when this alien spaceship, which had been hiding under this lunar soil, comes up, and they think these human astronauts are some of some human aliens who have been chasing them across the cosmos because they're bad guys. And they give a brief backstory, and with a little trickery, they get rid of the aliens using that metal, causing hallucinations. They surrender, and yada yada yada, and everything's fine. And then down here you see ads for two DC titles, Flash and Mystery in Space, featuring Adam Strange in that now iconic cover. And of course, these were also two titles that were drawn by Carmine Infantino and Murphy Anderson. Then a little informational thing about ratios, some scientific stuff. Then we get to the Atomic Knights. This is where I want the plant that hated humans. And in this story, of course, post-apocalyptic, one of the knights had been visiting one of the last remaining scientists alive that they found not too far away. And he was describing how these trefoil bean plants had mutated, and he was growing them, and but they had the ability to. They grew very fast. Then when they matured, they had the ability to get up and walk away, and they could communicate telepathically, and they were helping him rebuild the town. And this is where I missed 4 pages. Oh my gosh, in this story. The great Murphy Anderson art. Because then it switches to the part 2, and so what had happened apparently, they went to get the plants turned on the human. He was injured, and the Atomic Knights went to get him back, and all the plants are out to get the people, and they're attacking them, hurling little berries, which are small bombs, but they're protected by their armor, and there's thousands and thousands of them, and they're swarming towards the town of Derville, where they work, where they have a small community of surviving humans, and they're out there fighting, trying to fight off the advance of the plants. Then they discover that they can only travel in wet ground because they need the constant water, just as we would need constant air. They make, and all these plants. It really makes me think that this was strongly influenced by the Day of the Triffids. And I looked that up. And so they open the dam, which dries up the marshy area that they are traveling in, and they all basically suffocate and die because of the loss of the water as the marsh dries up. And there we go. Everything's safe. They post warnings about this plant, and this scientist is a new addition to their community. He's a botanist and creating new ways to raise food. And there's another ad, the Atom and Justice League of America. And that is the last of Strange Adventures. I know it was brief, but I talked longer earlier. And it is a fun example of some nice science fiction stuff. You just don't see these kind of anthology science fiction books anymore. I do believe that the art of the short story in comics is pretty much a dying or nearly dead art. You don't see it anymore. They're too wrapped up in very long, convoluted story form. Sometimes made longer just for the sake of making it longer. And of course, you can go to the other extreme with the short stories, making them too short that you don't have a chance to get invested in it, or too much detail of the story is left out. But it's what works. Tell me what you think about the art of the short story, whether it be the science fiction, general adventure, or horror in the comics. Tell me about that in the comments. Please like, share, subscribe, and do leave a comment. Do you like the Strange Adventures? Do you like these older-fashioned science fiction books? Because you just don't get much regular science fiction in comics anymore. And thank you for joining me. And remember, comics are art.